joined by Nasser Mashni from APAN, Australia's Palestinian Network. Nasser, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, David.
This is a very troubling time for lots of us, not just people in your community, but for Australians that are watching this genocide unfold on their phone while their Prime Minister is refusing to even utter that word. How are you, Nasser?
Look, it's tough, David. I go through moments of, sort of minor euphoric moments, and I say they're minor, but they are significant. My wife and I had dinner at a very salubrious, in a very salubrious suburb, and quote unquote, got to say, rich white space. We were the token darkies for the restaurant to talk about their DEI policy. We had our dinners at a table over the back of my wife's right shoulder, table of 5, boisterous, enjoying, the Easter spirit and Easter holidays. At the end of that dinner, they were leaving. A woman got up and she hesitantly sort of approached our table, apologized profusely for interrupting our dinner, and was just so gracious and thankful and respectful, and thanked me for all of the work I'm doing and for leading a space of humanity and inclusion. And forever, like I've done this my entire life, spoken for Palestine, but spoken for humanity and Indigenous justice and, queer justice, etc., my entire life. I've understood the intersectionality of all of those struggles. The set we could never crack, if you will, the space that it was most resistant to us is that live, love, laugh. Rich white woman, Chardonnay sipping, tennis club, golf club. I'm trying to, desperate housewives of, whatever.
Yeah.
That set is, so far removed from us that the intersection is very thin. And here she was in the middle of this, quote unquote, very rich white restaurant. Left her group, came over, was effusive in her praise, checked in on my wife. How are you going? Just know we're with you. And so you get those moments of things are going to change, yeah. But then you have the other moments where, you've got to go to the shops to pick up milk and bread, and you just see the world going on as if nothing's wrong. That nothing's wrong here, that nothing's wrong in Palestine, that nothing's wrong in Sudan or Congo or West Papua. That, where any one of us is only, tops a 5-minute drive from a Salvation Army or Vincent de Paul food kitchen. And that, we're talking in this very, I can't believe Australia is so rich that we've got primary schools that don't have air conditioning, and we're funding private schools, and, that there's homelessness, and, what is it? This year we're going to be on record, for the greatest femicide we've had, to date. A woman every 3 and a bit days is getting killed by her partner, and people are just in this zombie trance of consumerism, of individuality, without a connection or an empathy to anyone else. And then I overlay that with people I've known along my school life, business life, professional life, and the levels of engagement they've had with the genocide and or me, from complete disconnection to marginal acknowledgement to full immersion. And the dispersion of that, diminishes exponentially as to how many people, quote unquote, care. So sorry for that long answer.
No, it's
a spectrum.
Please speak your truth. It's obviously I'm coming from it. I'm not Palestinian, but I've been reporting on this for quite a while now. And I've experienced that very similar phenomenon amongst comfortable white liberalish people, where if I bring up the genocide and I get a little bit emotional and I start swearing, the problem is that I've been swearing. The problem isn't the fact that God knows.
Kids are burnt alive in a tent.
Exactly.
That women have been giving birth for a year and a bit, without anesthetic, that cesareans have happened without anesthetic, that women have had not had feminine hygiene products in over a year. This concept of white feminism that stops at fragile white femininity. And where is the outrage for? I mean, they were jumping up and down for Ukrainian women. What about Palestinian women? No, absolutely. But also, we were talking, it's a cognitive dissonance, whatever it is, that the imagery, etc., is so disturbing as to, it should just shock every one of us out of our comfort zones to say enough. I mean, if you were, you know, a little bit left of center, on October 7, you would have been Israel all the way. You know, they've got it. And there was a moment, I'd argue, where Israel could have actually gone to the world and said, well, you know, now you know what we're dealing with, quote unquote. You'll see what they're like. They're animals, they're savages. And I mean, the West's still buying it. But anyway, in that moment, they would have had a plurality and huge support for almost anything. Almost anything. We're building a wall. International forces have to come here. You have to impose a solution on them. Relocate 50%. I don't know what it could have been, but they could have actually almost got anything. Instead, they went hell for leather, actual Zionism, which is white supremacy, which is settler colonialism, which is, you know, what you need to do is get the indigenous people to such a small percentage of the overall population as to be arguably completely dismissible. And we see that here in this continent with indigenous folk, but, you know, everywhere settler colonialism has been, from Turtle Island to Aotearoa, anywhere. That settler colonial project didn't succeed because we're more than 50% of the population. And so when it gets the opportunity, it goes, great, smash, you know, drive indigenous folk off the cliffs of Van Diemen's Land, you know, etc. And because it didn't take that opportunity and it drove into exactly what it is, which is genocidal, racist, white supremacism, ethno-religious supremacy. For a week, a month, perhaps even to Christmas 23, that space was, well, they've got to do it. They've got to be safe. I mean, music festival, my kids. And then the lies started coming out, you know, it's starting to be dispelled. 40 beheaded babies, systematic rapes, etc. You know,
We never lost the hospital. We're the most moral army in the world, and now there aren't hospitals left.
There aren't hospitals left. The, you know, Hannibal director being called in, the video, you know, the imagery of that car park that, you know, if people are old enough, they might remember the highway out of Kuwait when Saddam was living in Kuwait, when the Americans, you know, strafed the entire line, kilometers, 10 kilometers long of fleeing Iraqis and just killed everybody. All of the lies that Israel perpetuated to manufacture the consent for and got probably overwhelming support for the best part of 2 months, maybe even up to 6 months for some people. But here we are 18 months later, coming into our 19th month. Like, the average person is, what the F? This is not self-defense. This is, you know, and so I know categorically October 6th was peak Israel. On October 6th, if you're an Israeli, you're out there going, hi, I'm from Israel. Yeah, it's fantastic, you know, IT nation, birth, startup country, all that bullshit they, you know, used to spin, the land without people, people without a land. We made the desert bloom. All of their terra nullius, settler colonial language to dismiss anything was there beforehand and any claim to it before they were there. To today, I mean, Israelis are, you know, I see videos of them in Thailand or whatever. They're not saying they're Israeli, you know. You know, Disney's Snow White bombs because it's got that genocide Gal Greenstein Godot in there. I'm sure in business rooms at the C-level in businesses, they're going, we've got this proposal from a US company, one from a Finnish company, and one from an Israeli company. They're like, get rid of that shit. I don't want to risk what might happen if it gets out that we're dealing with an Israeli company. I mean, it's a risk mitigation strategy. Do you need the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement picking you today? You know, that space has shifted, and so now we've got this. And I won't lie, this woman was, you know, an older woman, but obviously would have been very, very gorgeous in her day. Blonde hair, gold, jewelry. She's now on Team Palestine. And that didn't happen because Nasser tells a good story. It didn't happen because anything I'm saying today, 560 days later, is different to what I said 1,000 days ago or 2,000 days ago. It's the same story. It's really simple. White supremacy, a settler colonial ideology came and took my land. Full stop. It's not my fault they're Jewish. It's not my fault they're Jewish. We would resist if they were Sikh, Hindu, whatever. Doesn't matter. That set, that space is now here. And don't worry about her because she's in her 50s as I am. They're kids who have not had the lies and the manipulation of Paul Newman's Exodus movie, not had the manipulation and lies of the kibbutz, socialist enterprise. They haven't had the lies of a people without a land, for a land without people, for a people without a land. All of the bullshit mythology that the Zionist movement created that sold the boomers on the need for this racist genocidal state. The kids haven't got any of that shit.
No, I mean, we are drowning in Hasbara and myth and propaganda in our mainstream media, but the kids have a little bit of a detachment from that. They are
well, they're not. Murdoch's not speaking to them. Stokes is not speaking to them. Nine's not speaking to them.
Yep.
They're getting their stuff from influencers and from sites that, I don't know that you wouldn't know, David. Like, my kids don't watch TV. They've never bought a newspaper. They don't listen to the shock jock.
No.
And these are my kids who are politically engaged and have been at protests in their mother's womb. Yeah. We used to have competitions to hand out flyers in Burke Street Mall in the days when our protests were 30 people or 20 people. I've spoken at rallies, David, where I was related to everyone. Yeah. I was related to everyone in there, like a blood relative. That's how big our rallies were. And I've spoken to crowds of 50 and 100,000. I've spoken to over 1 million people in person at rallies. I don't know, it'd be more than 1 million, let alone the interviews and the media, nationally as well as globally. Like peak Israel's October 6th, they don't get to go back to this plucky little nation in a hostile area. Yep. Everyone realizes it's a shithole. It's a racist shithole. And you can support it
too.
Yeah, you can support it, but just know what I'm going to think of you. And, it's going to get support from the Peter Duttons. It's going to get support from the Donald Trumps. It's going to get support from far right figures because that's where Israel belongs.
Yeah,
it belongs in that space.
I'm worried that it's also getting support from, I don't even want to call them left-wing parties because they're not, but the more left option around the world, the UK Labour Party, the Australian Labour Party, the Democrats in the United States. One of the things that disturbs me most about the shape of Anglo-Western democracy is that, for me, this is the biggest issue on the planet alongside climate change and the growing inequality of wealth. And those three, you don't have any choice on the ballot amongst the major parties. They are all in alignment with American capitalism, with the Zionist settler project, and with continued fossil fuels.
David, I'd argue you're absolutely right. There's no question you're right, at a leadership level. But if you have a look at how much is happening underneath, like, the number of Labor branches that are friends of Palestine, the passed motions that are way beyond and past where the current Labor Party is, their platform, which hasn't been delivered, recognition of Palestine, etc., etc. The leadership is not representative of its membership. Bernie Sanders had a rally a couple of days ago, and he went with, Israel's got a right to defend itself bullshit. And the people unfurled a Free Palestine banner, and then he stopped speaking, and the police took him away, and the whole crowd started chanting "Free, Free Palestine." Now, Bernie Sanders is the hero of the left, a dinosaur, 80-year-old bloke, 80-year-old white bloke. You've been in the Senate for 50 years. At some point, work out you didn't do anything and get out of the way and let somebody else in. And you have a look at that, whether it's in the UK with Keir Starmer, he's not representative of. If they had preferential voting there, he wouldn't be Prime Minister. They've got first past the post. And have a look today. Our movement has been, fighting for something to do, something tangible to do. And this election is it. And, you know, at APAN, the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, we've released a whole suite of actions that our constituency can do to ensure that Palestine's on the ballot. And for years, I've advocated for and pressed politicians and explained to them from both sides of the party. You know, the deputy Liberal leader, Susan Ley, was a chair of the Parliamentary Palestine Friendship Group. Yeah.
I mean, Anthony Albanese founded that one.
Albanese founded it, yeah. So we've got, but I mean, he's still quote unquote notionally pro-Palestine according to a Zionist. Susan Ley, you know, is like completely on Team Israel now. She's an Israel firster from being, you know, a co-chair of the Parliamentary Palestine Friendship Group. That now our constituency has got something to do. An action. What can I do to support Palestine? How can I make Palestine do my bit for Palestine? We've had a superannuation campaign, which we're going to ramp up in the second part of this year. But the election is our focus. And I sincerely believe, really believe, that Palestine could have been a vote winner for these people. That today it's going to be a vote coster for many, a vote coster. And it's going to be a winner for progressive parties. And when you talk about those three great things that we, as I'm going to call us humanists, firstly, or empaths, care about: climate, wealth inequality, and Palestine. If we can't win on Palestine, like the global movement for justice for Palestine is unlike anything that's ever been seen before. No fight for anything ever before. Not the anti-Vietnam, not anti-Iraq, not gender stuff. There's never before have the street filled with people with one voice, one thing. If they beat Palestine, we've got no chance on income. We've got no chance on climate. We've got no chance on anything else. This is the defining moment where power, white supremacy, patriarchy has absolutely said we have to smash this. And if they do succeed in smashing this, we've got no hope.
I agree with everything you've said, and there's absolutely a groundswell amongst ordinary people, humanitarians. I agree entirely. At the same time, we are seeing those in power really ratchet up things. I mean, I've seen the worst things I've ever seen over the last 18 months or so. And it's still getting worse. We're seeing concentration camps in El Salvador. We're seeing brown people deported without due process, taken out of America, basically for saying free Palestine. We are like, the frog is well and truly boiled here. And I just really wish people could see how linked all this is. It's terrifying.
It is absolutely terrifying, David. There's no question. I have great capacity for hope and believe in humanity. That said, we can't but, you know, think about that poem by a Lutheran priest at Neubauer that said, you know, first they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came out for the socialists. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. They came for the gypsies. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a gypsy. They came for the whoever. And then they came for me. There was nobody left to speak out. That this is the canary in the coal mine. When you talk about Mahmoud Khalil in the US Columbia University student leader, you know, being snatched from his, you know, 8-month pregnant wife. I mean, she must be due to give birth any moment now. Whisked away to an ICE detention center 3 or 4 states away, so that they disconnect the family from their support network and from their people, to a judge moving him to a place where Donald Trump appointed judge presides over the case. You know, there was an El Salvadorian kid who was illegally grabbed, and the ICE agent, one ICE agent saying, this is not the guy, and the other ICE agent saying stuff at grab him anyway. You know, and he's a US citizen and now is languishing in a El Salvadorian jail, and you get the image of Donald Trump, leader of the free world, and the president of El Salvador joking to each other that neither of them could do anything to get this kid back. And we know they are death camps. These a concentration camp, arguably, although we know how evocative that image is. These are concentration camps. Yeah, I'm going to think of there was a better word for it, but these are death camps. You go there to be forgotten by society and to not come out. And we're enabling it. We're part of it. We're speaking to it. And and when I say that, in not condemning, you're taking a position, in not saying enough, in not doing everything we can to stop whatever it is. One of the things that politicians say is that nothing we do would matter. That's not the burden that you're under. Your burden is to do everything you can to ensure that you're not complicit. And that might make no difference, but at least your conscience is clear and every Australian is innocent of complicity.
That's
and
right.
That's what we need to hold people to.
And people are also unaware of the ripple effects of their actions. If someone's brave, then that inspires someone else to be brave, and so on and so on and so on. And that's why we don't roll over for fascist assholes. This is to get to this state of depravity, we've had to really condition people via the media to just accept anti-Palestinian racism and accept the dehumanization of Palestine. One of the things that shocks me is how socially acceptable anti-Palestinian racism is. I have people in my life that would not say a racist word about Jewish people or Indigenous Australians even, but they would say things that imply that there's something about Palestinians that make them more inherently prone to want to throw rockets, or, this natural terrorist gene or something. And they can only get to that point if they've removed all context from the situation. And that's why I blame the media for this, because that is literally what the media does. These phrases like Israel has a right to defend itself deny the fact that for 78 years it's been aggressively not defending itself, it's been expanding its borders. It's upside down way of describing these things.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I don't have a comment. The anti-Palestinian racism that exists in our society, you would argue that the more anti-Palestinian racist you are, the better you do in your job. Like you almost get rewarded for it. I mean, our alternative prime minister is on record that he's going to, wants to deport people marching under a Palestinian flag. He's going to, get a plebiscite up to change the constitution, allow deportation of dual citizens if they. I mean, the pandering to a constituency is so sickening and vile and cheap as to beg a belief. And I would argue today, and this is one of the challenges we have with definitions, like the University of Australia is adopting based on the flawed and really disgusting IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, is that today what anti-Semitism looked like in the world was ultimately the Holocaust. Move away from that with Spanish pogroms, Spanish Inquisition pogroms, Western Crusades. I mean, it's a Western disease, this white people invented this shit. But then you look at what was anti-Semitism in post-World War II and, the quote-unquote miracle that is the birth of Israel. Anti-Semitism in the West meant that, Joshua Goldberg graduates Melbourne University or Sydney University and can't get a job because he's Goldberg. He's a Jew. We don't employ Jews, He can't join, the clubs, Melbourne Club or all those other clubs. He can't join a golf club, like the golf clubs, the Melbourne golf clubs, Sydney golf clubs. That's where the business is done on the golf club, etc. He couldn't join those. And so you suddenly had Jewish law firms, and then you suddenly had Jewish clubs. And then they went and built their own golf clubs. Yeah. And that was the reality of anti-Semitism. There was a power that existed and a ceiling that oppressed and an exclusion because you're a Jew. Mm-hmm. 2025, those golf clubs are gone. Joshua Goldberg or his female equivalent is working in any law firm she wants to or he wants to. They're members of any club they want to or could be. But if you drill down into the ECAJ anti-Semitism report beyond the headline, 1,000% increasing, and you drill into what do they claim is anti-Semitism. I was on a tram and I saw somebody wearing a keffiyeh. I didn't feel safe. Anti-Semitism. Israel's an apartheid state. Boycott Israel. There was a student encampment and they were shouting from the river to the sea. Anti-Semitism. Overlay that with anti-Palestinian racism. It wasn't easy for an Australian of Palestinian ancestry to say you were Palestinian on October 6. On October 6, 76 years into the settler colonial project of Israel, but 116 years or something after Lord Balfour gave Palestine to Baron Rothschild in the Balfour Declaration, 1917. 160 years later. It wasn't easy being Palestinian then, let alone today. Many of our crew have sort of broken through that self-denialism, censorship of pretending to be Lebanese or Egyptian or Syrian, so they didn't have to deal with being Palestinian. They're now outwardly proud being Palestinian. But you can be David Miller, school teacher, wanting to teach about Palestine. Boom, parents are writing a letter in. You can be Antoinette Lattouf and share a Human Rights Watch post that the ABC shared themselves, and that's not going to stop the lobby from writing through to Ida Buttrose, who in her 8th decade and a bastion of femininity on the witness stand goes, shit, suggests to David Anderson, the managing director of the ABC, can't she just get COVID? You know, can we just tell her to get COVID? It's Khaled Sabsabi losing his invitation being to the Venice Biennale. It's a writer's workshop at the State Library. It's Keely Green being suspended from Queensland Music Awards for giving a speech about Palestine, and her album being about Palestine. It's kids getting sacked from a job for wearing a keffiyeh on World Keffiyeh Day. It's Alex Evans, who was at the Commonwealth Bank, in his own capacity, wrote a letter to the editor, and it was published in the Australian, and he loses his job. It's Jason Gilham, commentator, conductor, musician at the MSO, you know, loses his gig. It's Peter Laylor, a cricket commentator, sharing a tweet, 50-year, you know, bowling, Shane, you know, a bastion of cricket, gets a call from his boss saying, some of our listeners feel unsafe when they hear your voice. It's an Officeworks staff member who said that he doesn't want to laminate a horrid post from the Australian Jewish News, and unknown to him is being videoed, and that ends up being shared all over the joint. All of these incidences of anti-Palestinian racism, not one of them is Palestinian. Khaled Sabsabi is a Lebanese Muslim guy. Antoinette Lattouf is a Lebanese Christian person. All the rest of them are just Bob and Mary from the burbs, and merely being a little bit quote-unquote pro-Palestinian, have had the complete and utter weight of everything jumped on them. You know, when the doxing of the 600 artists for Israel, and I got questioned by somebody, one of the reporters, and they never actually extended on. He goes, you know, what do you think of that? And I said, oh, I think about it. What about the people they're hitting? I said, I'm happy. You can go through. I don't know how many WhatsApp groups I'm in. Seriously, like it's hundreds. Like some mornings I wake up and there's 500 messages in. I'll give you my phone and you go through it and you find a message where I go, Josh Greenberg, he works at Greenberg and Associates. How do we get rid of Josh? Our messages are, has anybody heard from Dave? I haven't seen him at a protest for a while. He was struggling last time. Can somebody reach out and check on him? It's self-care stuff. It's there's an Indigenous woman that's struggling to make her bills. Can we do a quick, whip around to the hat? What time's the protest today? Do you think I can bring my dog? Is it all right if I bring my kid? Can we carpool? We need to do something about Peter Khalid. Can somebody? I mean, that in the Artists for Israel, there's 600 people there, and I think somewhere around 50 were active. Yeah, but 50 people are going, let's get them.
Yeah,
and these are not people without power. I mean, we've seen some of the redacted emails, etc., that went into the AOC, but that was Lawyers for Israel, another group.
Mm-hmm.
You've got 50 people going, get them. And you've got another 150 people perhaps going, yeah. And then you've got 400 people silent. Some of them leave the group, some of them enter the group. And this reporter said to me, what do you think? And I went, look, I don't want to comment on them. I want to have a look at what they've done. I said, but if you wanted me to care about 600 people, the 50 people that said, let's get them, they're assholes. They're assholes. And the 150 people that go, yeah, they're assholes too. And the 400 people that didn't say, stop this, you're assholes too. But I don't care about those 600 people. Over here, you've got a woman, Clementine Ford, who's a publisher. They're writing to, does anyone know her publisher? Does anyone know how we can make sure she can't ever write a book again? You can go through my phone, David. You will not find a message where we said, let's get Josh Greenberg.
Mate, I don't need to go through your phone.
I mean, so that power that existed with anti-Semitism has gone. We've got this, not that anti-Semitism isn't real. It's absolutely real, and I'll tell you a story about that in a second. But what we have is anti-Palestinian racism with all the power and the smashing that existed in that space that doesn't exist anymore being directed on us. And I'll say about anti-Semitism, why it's so important to fight anti-Palestinian racism and why we need to call out anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism when it gets overlaid as anti-Semitism to protect this racist genocidal state, is that often, I mean, I get that much hate, it's not funny, and I've got a policy that I block Z trolls, delete block. But every now and again, I'll go on their profile. And there was a guy who went, deport, exclamation mark. And I went, okay, beauty. And I'm going to check him out. And I went and, there was his post, deport. And his post just below that was effing Jewish lizard people control the world. Like, the real anti-Semitism is actually the same as real anti-Palestinian racism, which is the same as real homophobia and real patriarchy and real white supremacism.
It's all just
we need to be fighting together. We need to be fighting together, not saying, oh, here's a special sort of thing, and we better give them a special envoy. And Peter Dutton wants to set up if he's re-elected, set up a special division to open up cold cases of anti-Semitism, because we're not sure that Labor's actually got all of them.
Jesus. You've outlined how this works. The chilling culture on arts, on academia. I think right now we're at the point where it's quite obvious that this is more than just reactionary assholes trying to shut people down. This is, especially the stuff with the universities, it is a form of creeping authoritarianism, creeping fascism that is chilling me to the bone, really, especially when you see where America is always a few years ahead of where we end up being.
I mean, we saw Columbia University, to get $400 million in funding, had to give up a whole bunch of stuff and appoint a Trump nominee and a department to oversee every department and every course and make sure that everything's happening. Harvard University a day ago rejected that, said you can keep your money, we don't want it. How long they'll be able to hold that for, who knows? But this, when universities are supposed to be spaces. The whole concept of a tenured professor was that they were removed from the triviality, if you will, of having to having to work to eat and shelter, that they could challenge free thought, move society's ideas and the body of knowledge of our community forward. And that's what universities are supposed to do when they're at their best, a real robust exchange of ideas. And we know that when this is happening, we're moving society, etc., upwards and onwards. That if we get to this point where we are in Colombia, where what was proposed for Harvard, and at some point I imagine they'll be able to push that through, but we have special departments protecting what can be said and how it might be said and who might say it and who might be employed. We are absolutely halfway through George Orwell's 1984. We are absolutely in mind control. We are absolutely, just another brick in the wall, as the song goes, yeah. And we've got to resist it, and we've got to fight it.
Let's talk about the West more generally, because one of the things that I think is really coming home to roost now is that progressives within American sphere of influence have basically felt like they could memory hole what's going on in the Middle East. They can be, as long as they're espousing, gay rights, black rights at home in the imperial core, we'll just ignore the fact that all this is propped up by the fact that we've murdered about 5 million brown people in the Middle East since 9/11, that we've been pilfering oil from the region for decades. And I think what we're seeing really is the imperial boomerang effect that Hannah Arendt talked about, where, these modes do come home. Your leaders, your populations become, this is normalized, this type of violence. And more than that, the people that are in charge, they work out how to do this stuff. They work out what they can get away with. And it really feels like just a failure of establishment progressive parties to not see where this was always heading.
Yeah. But that's what capitalism does. It commodifies us, and it fragments societies and communities and individualizes us, and it gets us to the point where we want to protect what's mine. And so, if you go back to Bill Shorten and Scott Morrison, the unlosable election, and he talks about franking credits, which 99% of us don't get. Like, our super funds get it, but I mean, it's not whether we got it or not. If everybody didn't get it or everybody did get it in a super fund, it's not going to make a grand difference. But the people who get it outside of super funds, where it does actually make a huge difference, they're not us. It's not us. I've never had a franking credit in my life that I know about. Negative gearing. You can own 1,000 properties. We'll just keep giving you tax back. Yeah. We saw with Purple Pingers, getting condemned by our Prime Minister for a house that was empty for 17 years, that housed the belongings of a woman's dead parents for 17 years, that a squatter moved in, and the outrage. I mean, what about the outrage that the house has been empty for 17 years? What about the outrage? What sort of, if my children got, like I hope it's a long time ago, if I'm dead and they haven't gone through my stuff for 17 years, what sort of kids have I raised? Where's that question? People, if one person every 4 days dies from issues related to homelessness, that's not the conversation. Rather, it's Purple Pingers, Jordan, that's getting smashed. That intrinsically left policy that Bill Shorten ran on, which, should you own 50 properties? Well, if you own 50 properties, you own 50 properties, but you're not getting anything from the government. Yeah, we're not going to give you anything, and what have you had? Okay, we'll grandfather that, but we're not giving you anything anymore. That gets smashed, that franking credits get smashed, that, a guy who ends up saying to women who are protesting for the rights of women following the rape of Brittany Higgins, that guy then says, these women should be happy they're in Australia, because if they were in any other country, they'd be machine gunned. And, that ends up being our Prime Minister. And then you look at it from a leadership perspective, but then come down to like the street level. Like, I'm old enough to remember a copper having a revolver, right? And, being in shirt sleeves. You see an average police guy today, you're going to get pulled over for a random breath test or, a traffic stop. This guy looks like he could invade Iraq. Like, he's in that much kit. I mean, that much kit. You look at our riot squads and all those stuff. I mean, they've got more kit than the crew that went to Vietnam, you know, or the militarization of. And then you get to, okay, please stand for the national anthem. I mean, I can't remember ever standing for the national anthem as a kid at the footy, but now, you know, it's Anzac Day. Lest we forget. Lest we forget. Lest we forget that rich white dudes who had a measure of the world, God, king, empire, then everything else. They were sliding pieces all over. Went side,
Yeah.
wild colonial boys, diggers, to Gallipoli.
And on the board are uniformly the poor people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to go, these wild, I call them wild colonial boys, to bring up that, you know, A.E. what's his name? Who wrote the poem? Anyway, it escapes me. But you go to Ballarat or Bendigo, any one of these regional towns, and go to a World War I memorial, and you'll see J. McNamara, N. McNamara, S. McNamara, you know, brothers, uncles, fathers, sons, wiped from the population registry in the pursuit of God, King, Empire. And Gallipoli is the birth of the Anzac spirit. And if you interrogate that, the Anzac spirit, I'm okay sending my kid, because some rich dude wanted to protect the empire, to his slaughter. And if you ever visit Gallipoli, you'll realize that an elevated position, you know, with World War I, leather boots, nails in the boots. I mean, not rubberized stuff, in those Hessian sacks with, you know, a week's worth of provisions, jumps out in a 50-kilo backpack into, you know, nipple deep water, trudging through with a bolt action rifle to get to a beach. And I mean, you read some of the stories of the Turks, how harrowing it was for them to go, what are they doing? And hearing the order shoot and just going, pum, 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 pum. And them going, why won't they stop jumping out of the boats? Can they not see what's happening? And the birth of the Anzac spirit is that sacrifice that our most naive and beautiful and innocent Australians coming off the farm in Bendigo, Ballarat, Sale, Wonthaggi, Warrnambool, wherever, get on a ship, you know, 6 weeks training on a ship, and then jump out and are massacred moments, you know, in a timeline after leaving their mother's embrace. That's the Anzac spirit, that we're standing up. I mean, we're almost, I mean, what the hell? You know, the thing that was great about Australia is we would laugh at ourselves and mock that sort of gross nationalism. All stand for, we thank the veterans. I mean, we're thanking veterans now. You know, I'm only standing with the Australian flag. I won't stand with an Indigenous flag. One flag for everyone. We're not dividing anything. And whoa, if you try and challenge that. Yasmin Abdul Majid, brilliant Australian Sudanese woman, hijabi, you know, she on the ABC, it's over a decade ago, said, lest we forget, you know, Palestine, Sudan. And they went after her. She had to leave the country.
Yeah.
She had to leave the country. Don't you dare challenge. And now, you know, Anzac Day, that was a nothing. I mean, I went to quote unquote rich white schools on a scholarship. And we would do, you know, sing in the choir at Anzac Day and stuff. We had 500 people, some old dudes, and, you know, maybe 1,000. But now the procession and the closing down and the dawn services, you know, this veneration of the sacrifice. We haven't had a war to protect Australia ever. We have been involved in many military adventures that were about Western imperialism and Western hegemony. There is one thing that we can and should be proud of from a military perspective, aside from the frontier wars. We're not going to talk about, you know, the frontier wars and how they're not acknowledged at the Australian War Museum, etc., the decimation of Indigenous culture, etc., and the genocide that continues here in this colony. But the one thing the Australian Defence Force should be proud of is how they held the Japanese in Kokoda. The Japanese were invading Australia.
Yep.
And if people don't know this story, I'll just very quickly, David, if you indulge me, when the Japanese were bombing Darwin and Curtin to Churchill and said, the Japanese are here, and Churchill went, God, King, Empire, God, King, Empire. You know, it's one of the architects of the Gallipoli massacre. God, King, Empire, Curtin. And he said, I've got to save Australia. And Churchill said to him, draw a line from Brisbane to Adelaide. Negotiate with the Japanese and give them everything west of the Brisbane line. And when we beat the Germans, we'll come back and help you with the Japanese. And Curtin, to his great credit, said, piss off. And he recalled the Aussie troops out of North Africa, but in the meantime had to hold Kokoda, because if the Japanese had got Kokoda and that forward air base, they would be able to bomb further south into Australia than just the north of it. And the diggers that held Kokoda were ex-World War I men, were kids. So if you go to the gravesite, and I've been there in Kokoda, the ages are 50 and 44 and 16 and 17. These were kids too young to get to Europe, and guys that were too old. And they held Kokoda until the regular forces came back. That would be an Anzac spirit. All of us should be proud of and get behind that sacrifice to save Australia from invasion. But every other, from the Boer War through to Afghanistan, we've been just an instrument in Western imperialism, and it's shameful.
100%. I'm glad you brought up the genocide on this island against Indigenous people. Obviously not a cheery thing to talk about, but I do wonder sometimes whether the memory holding, the cognitive dissonance, the instinctive Israel has a right to defend itself that comes out in people is based on the way we choose not to perceive what actually happened here.
There's no question, David. There's no question. On October 7, whether it was the media or politicians, we immediately stood with Israel. And it was a reflex. It's like a fly, you know, it's not something you think about. Your hand just waves the fly or the mozzie away. You know, it's a reflex. And it's a reflex because this joint is the same white supremacist, settler colonial, smash Indigenous, where the enlightened, chosen, whatever you want to call that supremacist notion. And so Israel is Australia, Australia is Israel, is America, is every one of these white supremacist nations. And it said, oh my God, the rebels are rising, the Indigenous are rising, you know. And I remember reading something just on that very quickly. We can watch a movie, and when the rebels fight back, we root for them. Yeah, come on, Empire Strikes Back. You know, go Luke Skywalker.
Star Wars explains all of this shit.
But when you're a brown person, like, no, we're going for the Empire. You know, like in the movies, we're all go, you know, go. We're fighting for the oppressed, whether it be Dune or Star Wars or any one of those movies. We're barracking for the underdog. It's the empire that oppresses all of us. It's the empire that says you can have 1,000 houses and you can destroy Indigenous sites to get coal, and you can imprison Indigenous kids at a rate not seen anywhere else in the world. And you can imprison Indigenous folk at a percentage of population not seen anywhere else in the world. And you can take their kids away and strip them of language and culture and still find a representative of that community to sit next to our alternative prime minister and say, I want to make Australia great again. Like it's ever been great for an Indigenous person for the past 238 years from when Captain Cook's ship sailed in.
The thing that just boggles my mind is that when American Star Wars fans, they decide that this is about ancient Rome, and it's like, man, he was a hippie in the 60s. He's definitely writing about America.
We love smoking Woodstock. Right. Jimi Hendrix. Wake the fuck up.
How do we, all right, let's wrap it up. Where to from here? What do we do? How do we keep fighting the good fight?
Yeah. Look, it's so important, David. It's a really important question. So, in the first instance, we've got to vote for Palestine. Make sure you quiz your candidate. Go to the APAN website, APAN, Australia Palestine Advocacy Network.org.au, and take our voters pledge. Send an email to all of your candidates saying your vote is going to be for Palestine. And as we said earlier in the interview, voting for Palestine is about voting for climate justice, about voting for income equality. It's about Indigenous rights. It's about all of those intersectional struggles to fight against homophobia, patriarchy, etc. Number one. Number two is to get involved in your solidarity groups. Find them on Facebook. Go to the APAN website. You can connect to any. I mean, we've got hundreds of groups now. Like Banyul for Palestine, Mums for Palestine, Pediatric Workers for Palestine. I mean, the number of For Palestines you can find is just extraordinary. Unionists, whoever you are, there is a For Palestine. I don't know if there's golf players for Palestine yet, but we just need a champion. We just got to get a champion for that. And then to use your privilege. I can't be in every space, in every lounge room, at every birthday, but wherever you are, normalize the conversation around this is unacceptable. And in it being unacceptable, there is a responsibility to do something. And the something tomorrow is to be part of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. That as individuals, we can choose to boycott products that profit from, enable the oppression and dispossession of Palestinians as individuals. That we can demand divestment from our super funds, from our banking institutions, that they divest from companies that profit from, etc. And that we demand our government sanction Israel. And all of these things exist. And a beautiful model exists, not only from the success of that movement, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions in ending apartheid in South Africa, but they exist as an exemplar because they happened 2 years ago to Russia. And the hypocrisy that exists within our ruling set, within our media, that says Russia is occupying Ukraine, therefore we're going to change Chicken Kiev to Chicken Kiev, or the other way around.
Very freedom fries all over again. Remember when in America they became freedom fries and not French fries? Because France want to invade Iraq and Afghanistan.
Correct. That when Russian flags are not allowed at the tennis. If you're competing as a Russian, you can compete as an international with a white flag, not with a Russian flag. That our banks and financial services entities sold all their Russian holdings. That our government put sanctions on Putin and his associates. That all three of those things were enacted and enabled and led by not only civil society, but are complemented by media and the government. That the hypocrisy, whether it's at a government, media, or consumer level, that these precious white babies are so much more important and worthy of our empathy than a brown baby. And that ultimately is the difference. And we need to expose that hypocrisy and hold those in power to account. And the first thing we can do is vote for Palestine.
Nasser Mashni, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, David.